Welcome to Life Stories, where we share tales of resilience, transformation, and personal growth. Today's story is about Emily, a woman whose seemingly perfect life was shattered by betrayal, but who found the strength to rebuild and rediscover herself. It's a powerful reminder that even in the face of heartbreak, we have the power to create a new beginning. Join us as we dive into this inspiring journey of love, loss, and empowerment. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to begin today's story, because every journey deserves to be shared. My name is Emily, and for over a decade, I had lived what seemed to be the perfect life. From the outside, everything appeared to be exactly as I had dreamed it would be. I was married to James, a charming and successful businessman who had built a name for himself in the industry. Our home was a serene, picturesque house in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. The gardens bloomed in vibrant colors, and the community around us was tight-knit, full of friendly faces and shared laughter. For years, James and I had lived in a world that felt like a fairy tale. Our marriage was admired by friends and acquaintances. People often said that we were the perfect couple, and in my heart, I believed they were right. I had dedicated myself to being the perfect wife. I supported James in his career, managing our home with grace and style. And I often hosted gatherings where I played the part of the gracious hostess. The compliments I received felt like a reflection of the life we had built together. To me, our love was a perfect partnership, a shared dream of success, happiness, and mutual respect. Every morning followed the same quiet routine, a simple breakfast together before James headed off to work. I packed his lunch, kissed him goodbye, and watched him drive off to his busy day, feeling proud of the life we had created. It was always a quiet, intimate moment that felt like the bedrock of our shared existence. I would spend my day immersed in various activities, volunteering at local charities, painting, or simply enjoying the tranquility of our home. Life felt predictable, serene, and, to be honest, incredibly satisfying. I didn't have any reason to suspect that anything was wrong. But, as the months passed, I began to notice subtle shifts in James's behavior. At first, I thought it was simply my imagination. Perhaps I was overthinking things. James was spending more and more time at the office, often staying late with vague excuses about work emergencies. It was out of character for him. He used to be so attentive, so present, yet, now, he seemed distant, almost like a stranger to me. His kisses, once full of affection, had become mechanical, and I began to feel like a shadow in my own marriage. My heart ached with confusion and doubt, but I convinced myself that it was nothing more than a phase. After all, we had built this life together, and he loved me, didn't he? As the days went on, I found myself more and more uneasy, but I pushed those feelings aside. I didn't want to be the kind of person who let paranoia take over. It wasn't like I had any proof. After all, I kept telling myself that everything was fine, that I was just imagining things. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The cracks were too clear to ignore. It wasn't until one evening, as I was arranging flowers in the dining room, that the world I thought I knew began to crumble. I overheard a hushed phone conversation coming from James's study. His voice, usually steady and confident, sounded nervous and strained. I couldn't make out all the words, but I heard him whispering, "I can't talk right now. She's in the next room." My heart stopped in my chest. His tone was filled with anxiety, and the words were enough to send a cold chill through my spine. I could feel my pulse racing as I tried to process what I had just heard. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to figure out what was happening. The study door was slightly ajar, and I strained to hear the conversation more clearly. But it was as if my mind couldn't quite catch up with the reality of the situation. The words that I did hear confirmed something I had feared deep down. Whoever he was talking to, it wasn't about work. The conversation ended abruptly, and James came out with a forced smile, brushing past me without so much as a glance. He muttered something about just being a client. But I knew, even without the specifics, that something was terribly wrong. That night, as I lay next to him in bed, the distance between us felt unbearable. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but a part of me was terrified of what I might hear. Instead, I buried my face in my pillow, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my chest. I kept telling myself that I was being ridiculous, that I was just overthinking. But deep down, I knew my perfect life was beginning to fall apart. Days passed, and I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. But the unease continued to build, and I began to pay closer attention. I watched every little movement, every excuse, every change in his demeanor. His late nights became more frequent, and his phone became an inseparable part of his routine. It was as though he was living two lives, one with me, and one that I was no longer a part of. I could no longer shake the feeling that I was living with someone who had mastered the art of deception. The realization that I had been blind to this for so long was the most painful part. I had trusted him, loved him with all my heart. And yet, there I was, questioning everything I thought I knew. It wasn't long before the world I had once built began to crumble. Piece by piece, the cracks that had started as tiny fractures were now deep, undeniable fissures in the foundation of our life. As the days dragged on, I could no longer ignore the gnawing feeling in my stomach that something was terribly wrong. I spent my nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, playing over and over the moments when I had seen James distant. The hurried whispers, and the hidden glances. Then came the day that changed everything. I was sitting in the living room, going through some old photos, when I heard the doorbell ring. The sound was sharp, unexpected, and somehow unsettling. I opened the door to find a woman standing on the porch, tall, poised, and dressed in a tailored red dress that seemed too perfect for a casual afternoon. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she stepped forward, and a smug smile curled at the corners of her lips. There was something about her presence that immediately set me on edge. "I'm here to talk about James," she said, her voice oozing with condescension. My stomach dropped. My heart raced. I felt as though the ground beneath me had shifted, and the world had tilted. Who was this woman? What was she talking about? Her words hit me like a slap. But I couldn't bring myself to shut the door. My mind was reeling, trying to process what she was saying. And I invited her inside, though I immediately regretted it. She wasted no time, settling into the couch with an air of authority that was almost suffocating. "I thought you should know," she continued, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Especially since I'm carrying his child." I froze. For a moment, the room felt like it was closing in on me. The words echoed in my mind, but I couldn't process them. I could feel my chest tighten as the world around me began to lose focus. "You're pregnant?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. The woman nodded, her smile widening. "Yes, I'm pregnant with his child. And I thought you should know the truth before you hear it from someone else." The tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing my pain. Instead, I stood, my body shaking with a mix of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. I demanded that she leave. But she wasn't done. She enjoyed every moment of watching me squirm, and I could see the satisfaction in her eyes as she lingered. Once she finally left, I collapsed onto the couch, the weight of her words sinking in. It felt as though the very air had been sucked out of the room, leaving me gasping for breath. How could this be real? How could James, the man I had trusted with my heart and my life, betray me so completely? That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My mind was racing, and the image of Olivia's smirk kept playing in my head, over and over. How could she be so confident, so unapologetic? She seemed to thrive on my pain, and the idea that she was carrying James's child only made the wound deeper. When James came home, I didn't wait for him to speak. I confronted him immediately. There was no beating around the bush, no pretending that things were still okay. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and heartbreak. "Who is Olivia? And why is she pregnant with your child?" For a moment, James didn't speak. He stood frozen, his face draining of color. I could see the hesitation in his eyes. And I knew then, without a shadow of a doubt, that Olivia's words had been true. His confession came slowly, each word laced with regret and a desperate attempt to justify himself. I made a mistake," he said, his voice faltering. "It was a lapse in judgment. I never wanted to hurt you. Emily, I never meant for this to happen. But his words felt hollow. They were too little, too late. The damage had already been done. I wanted to scream at him, to ask how he could do this to me after everything we had shared. But instead, I just stood there, numb, as the weight of his betrayal crushed me. The conversation didn't last long. He apologized again, but there was no sincerity in his voice. His eyes darted nervously around the room, unable to meet mine. And in that moment, I realized that the man I had loved for so long, the man I had built my entire life around, was no longer the person standing before me. He was a stranger, a shadow of the man I had married. When I demanded to know about the child, his silence confirmed my worst fears. Olivia was pregnant, and James didn't deny it. I felt as though the ground had given way beneath me, and I was falling into an abyss with no way out. That night, as I lay in bed next to him, I couldn't even bring myself to close my eyes. The weight of everything, the lies, the deceit, the betrayal, was too much. I wanted to confront him again, to shout at him, to demand answers, but all I could do was stare at the ceiling, the pain gnawing at my insides, knowing that my perfect world had just shattered. The days after James's confession felt like a blur. My world had shifted in an instant. The life I had once cherished, the life I thought was perfect, was now a distant memory. I had spent so much time wrapped up in the illusion of our marriage that I never once considered the possibility of betrayal. Now, everything felt wrong. I had trusted him completely, and in return, he had shattered the very foundation of my existence. The morning after that painful conversation, I woke up feeling empty. The house, once so full of life and warmth, now felt cold and suffocating. It was no longer the place I wanted to be. I felt trapped in a world that no longer made sense. I couldn't look at James the same way anymore. His presence, once comforting, now felt like a constant reminder of the lie I had been living. Despite the overwhelming sense of loss, I knew I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't stay in this toxic environment forever. For the first time in a long while, I realized that my happiness wasn't tied to James or to the life we had built. I had spent so much time taking care of him, supporting his dreams, that I had forgotten about my own. But now, the truth had exposed everything that had been holding me back. It was time to rediscover who I was, independent of him. Independent of the life I had once thought I was meant to lead. I reached out to James's estranged mother, Laura. We had never been close. But in the wake of everything that had happened, she became a source of unexpected support. When I called her, her voice was filled with concern, and there was a softness there that I had never noticed before. She was aware of the situation, and for the first time, I felt like someone understood the pain I was going through. You don't have to go through this alone, Emily, she said, her tone steady but warm. I'll be here for you. Laura's support meant the world to me. She offered me not just emotional comfort but practical advice. She told me to focus on myself, to rebuild the parts of me that had been neglected for too long. And as much as I was devastated by the betrayal, her words gave me the strength to take the next step. In addition to Laura's support, I decided to hire a private investigator named Jack. He was discreet, professional, and focused. I knew that I needed concrete evidence to understand the full extent of James's involvement with Olivia. I couldn't just sit in the shadows, waiting for answers. I had to take control of the situation. And that meant facing the truth head-on. Jack's investigation unearthed a disturbing pattern of manipulation and deceit, confirming what I had feared, that Olivia was not just a passing affair. She had been carefully orchestrating her presence in James's life for much longer than I had realized. With the evidence Jack gathered, I began to feel a sense of empowerment. For the first time, I wasn't sitting passively in my own life, waiting for things to get better. I was taking action. The pain of betrayal was still raw, but it no longer had the power to paralyze me. I was reclaiming my autonomy. Bit by bit, I also started focusing on my own passions again. I had neglected my love for painting for years, always putting it aside to support James's ambitions. But now, the canvas became a refuge, a space where I could channel my emotions into something beautiful. I enrolled in a business course I had always dreamed of taking. And soon, I found myself rediscovering the woman I had once been, confident, creative, and driven. It wasn't an easy journey. There were days when I wanted to collapse in despair. Days when I thought I couldn't go on. But through the support of Laura, the guidance of Jack, and my own determination, I began to rebuild my life from the ashes of the past. I had lost so much. But in the process, I realized that I had also gained something invaluable, the strength to move forward. And as I began to piece together the fragments of my shattered world, I knew that this was only the beginning of something new, something better. The weeks that followed James's confession were marked by an overwhelming sense of confusion and sadness, but also by the undeniable realization that my life was mine to rebuild. I had spent too many years living in the shadow of someone else's choices. And now, I was determined to create a future that belonged entirely to me. It wasn't easy. Every corner of our home, every shared memory, reminded me of the life we once had. But as painful as it was, the process of letting go felt strangely liberating. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. Every room felt like it was suffocating me, filled with memories of a life I no longer recognized. So, I began making plans to leave. I wasn't sure where I would go, but I knew it had to be somewhere far from the life I had shared with James. I needed to escape, to start fresh. The thought of living with the constant reminders of betrayal was too much to bear. Meanwhile, word of the affair began to spread. I could feel the eyes of friends, acquaintances, and even strangers on me. At the grocery store, I would catch people whispering behind their hands, their conversations hushed but unmistakably about me. The judgment was palpable, and it was one of the hardest things I had ever faced. My privacy had been shattered, and my pain was no longer mine alone. It had become something to be gossiped about, dissected, and speculated upon. The worst part was the sympathy that came with it. People reached out to me, offering their condolences, but it felt hollow. It was as though they didn't see me as a person, but as a tragic story to be pitied. "I'm so sorry to hear about what happened," they would say, their voices dripping with a kind of insincerity that only made the pain sharper. I had to learn to ignore them, to block out the voices that didn't understand, that couldn't comprehend the depths of what I was going through. But there was a turning point in all of this. As the days passed, I began to realize that I didn't need anyone's approval or sympathy. I didn't need to be validated by those who had never truly understood my life. I was stronger than I had given myself credit for, and the more I focused on my own healing, the less I cared about what others thought. This was my journey, and it was time to walk it with my head held high. In the midst of all the chaos, one unexpected source of strength emerged: Laura, James's mother. For years, she had been a distant figure in my life, someone I rarely spoke to. But now, she offered me something I hadn't realized I needed: a voice of reason. She knew the full extent of the situation and understood the complexities of her son's actions. Laura wasn't just a mother, she was a woman who had seen the consequences of James's mistakes firsthand. And despite the strain in their relationship, she reached out to me with genuine concern. "Emily, you're not alone in this," she told me one evening over the phone. "I know what you're going through, and I want to help." Her words gave me the strength to keep moving forward. Laura's support wasn't just about comforting me in the moment. It was about showing me that there was a way out of this mess. A way to rebuild, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself slowly but surely taking control of my life. I moved into a small apartment, a modest but peaceful space where I could start over. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I filled it with things that made me feel alive: paintings, books, and a few cherished mementos that reminded me of who I was before everything changed. I started painting again, rediscovering my love for the art that had been neglected for so long. It was a therapeutic outlet, a way to channel all the anger, sadness, and frustration into something tangible, something beautiful. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of hope. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't easy, but I could see the path ahead of me. I had lost so much, but in the process, I had gained so much more. I was rediscovering myself, one step at a time. And the more I focused on my own healing, the more I realized that I was stronger than I had ever known. As the months passed, I found myself growing stronger with every step I took. My new life, though born from pain, had become a testament to resilience and self-discovery. I had reclaimed my independence, rediscovered my passions, and learned the power of trusting myself. No longer defined by the betrayal I had endured, I was becoming the woman I had always wanted to be, confident, empowered, and unshakable. Though the road to healing had been long and difficult, I no longer felt the need to hold on to the past. The chapter with James, with Olivia, was closed. The life I was now building was mine alone, shaped by my choices and my strength. I had embraced the lessons learned from my pain and turned them into something beautiful. I had found peace within myself. And as for James, he was still lost in the wreckage of his own decisions. I had forgiven him, but forgiveness didn't mean going back, it meant moving forward. Our paths would never cross again in the same way. But I didn't need him to define my future anymore. I stood at the edge of a new beginning, a life that was mine to shape. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an inspiring tale of transformation and strength. Life is full of lessons, and together, we can grow stronger with every story shared. Stay tuned for more of life stories, where every journey is worth telling.